the move that I make as I find myself working on my reworking Wisdom Works and moving into the section that I call depth. I'll say a word about that in a moment. But also what it means to care for the soul. And it's a wonderful, exquisite image that there's something growing deep within us, and there is actually a skill to caring for the soul. One reason I was a bit disappointed when I read the book and then studied the book a couple of years ago, The Care of the Soul, and had a great first chapter, and then the book kind of petered out, and I thought to myself, well, what book would I write about care of the soul? And it's a very, very difficult idea. I do want to say a word about that tonight as well. So since you all know that I am, and I consult with Meirav, redesigning the Wisdom Works curriculum, getting ready to, I always am thankful that I didn't put up the classes on our Teachable website yet, because I've really rethought how to do it, I think, a more meaningful and accessible way. And I'm glad I have the opportunity here to run things by you and take your questions. I began this series with a meditation on something that I normally would have reserved for an advanced class, which is the meditation on the true self, the authentic self, because they are rather ethereal ideas. And people who are stuck in interpersonal crisis, marriages falling apart, relationships falling apart, or an inner crisis, people's really plagued by insecurity, guilt, shame, resentment, anxiety, etc. Talking about the authentic self and true self did not seem to be of immediate help. But I thought there has to be you might say, part of the vision for our living as human beings, including a vision for living well with others, including a vision for thriving within, a vision for eudaimonia, as we say in Greek, good-spiritedness, osher, spiritual contentment, something a bit deeper. And you remember that I was inspired by this because I see ads in the Facebook page called English Speakers of Tel Aviv, and it's a lot of good information, but a lot of people advertising things. And one was a writing program that would help you discover your authentic self. And I thought, that's great. I could sign up and I get a 20% discount and I'll discover my authentic self in 6 weeks. I mean, what a deal. I thought maybe it's true. Maybe this person has the secret. And then another one was a ulpan, a Hebrew intensive that said, the unique nature of this ulpan is you will be able to talk about your true self. I thought, what an achievement. A 30-year-old bilingual Israeli is going to help people discover their authentic self while learning Hebrew. Also 20% discount. I was skeptical at first, and I thought to myself, it might be true. There might be hidden mystics in Tel Aviv that I haven't yet met. But it pushed me into a meditation on these ideas, the true self and the authentic self. So I want to just repeat that very briefly because it was helpful for me in my own spiritual work and counseling other people. So neither of these words is an achievement, is something you find, a state that you arrive at, something waiting for you, as it were, but rather a constant process of how you live. So when I think of the true self, I think it is the result of the wisdom, mostly of self-knowledge. Remember, I think wisdom begins in knowledge, and for human transformation, a particular kind of knowledge called insight. To solve the problems in the in the world of the Middle East, I don't know how much insight one needs, probably some, but you need a lot of knowledge about what's going on in the world and what the players are. But if you want to do any kind of transformation of yourself and transformation in the presence of other people, and to be a present witness to someone else's transformation, and even to help them in their transformation, the first thing we need is tremendous insight. Because the problem is, if we don't know ourselves well and deeply, we're not going to be able to transform, number one. And number two, other people who are relying on us for feedback, if we don't know ourselves, we might be offering them help with our agenda, which means we want to make them more palatable to us. Meaning, for a person to discover their true authentic self might make them less likable from our perspective. For example, a person who needs to draw boundaries better, Oftentimes, aggressive people don't want other people to draw boundaries better. So, if are do you want to help a person be really from true deep knowledge? If you're a person who wants your way, if you're a person who demands compliance, do you want your teenager to draw boundaries and against an aggressive parent? Well, I mean, I know we worked on it. The thing we taught our children was, look, we know we can come on strong. Here's how to struggle against us. That was a pretty big achievement in our parenting. And boy, did the kids learn it well. I was like, wow, you really learned the lesson. You're really drawing really great boundaries. But that is part of, my self-knowledge is that I can be very persuasive and convinced that I'm right, but I wanted to empower, the kids to stand up to us and how to scrutinize what I'm saying and how to verify it and make sure it's useful. So part of the search for the true self is to know your, as um, the great Kabbalist Luzzatto says, know your hergelim and drachim, your inner life habits and pathways. Certainly know where the pain is. Certainly know what your hopes and aspirations are. Certainly know where your the shape of your broken heart. There's so many aspects to knowing yourself, but like the poem we read shows us, it takes an incredible amount of time and cultivation. As you've heard me say time and time again, if it's not on your calendar, it's not real. If you don't have calendar time for insight and you're relying on an occasional inspiration, I don't think you really will develop useful insight. You'll have what's called haphazard insight. Now, I don't have a specific program other than what I normally teach, and I'll repeat that in a second. But the cultivation of insight, I think it is the overall foundation of any transformation, insight into yourself. Now, once we can know ourselves relatively well, we can achieve inferred insight into other people. This comes up in nearly every beginning counseling practice where a person says, I don't know why my wife, husband, child is that way. My response, I say, well, give it a try. They say, what? I said, why do you think they are as they are? And people are so invested in complaining about how people are, it doesn't occur to them to actually cultivate insight as to who they are, especially people who are regularly upset by a behavior that has been going on for 20 years, and they're so surprised when it comes out. After 20 years, you shouldn't be so surprised. It's probably predictable. Well, what is the behavior? Where do you think it comes from? And how do you think you should respond? You'll be astonished to know how few people ever think that way. My spouse is predictable. I predictably respond in the wrong way to make things worse. And their behavior probably comes from somewhere. It doesn't seem to be voluntary. And therefore, look at myself and ask myself, are my responses making things better? Or are they rooted in my defensiveness or aggressiveness? What's going on inside of them? Right? And the third part of insight is the processes that people and groups of people go through, all the way from a family to any kind of organization. So the knowledge, the first knowledge of wisdom is insight into myself, inferred insight into each other, into others, insight into the processes that people, groups of people go through, and some deep understanding of the human condition, unfiltered by ideology. By the way, which is one reason that I have been against so much of what goes under this big label called the woke movement, when it tried to tell people how they are because of their gender fluidity, their race, their class, something, as if that explains most of what a human being is. Now, I've known people from a variety of backgrounds and sexual orientations, and they're not all one way. I shared with you many years ago, I was invited to come to a seminar for counselors, like something, skills for counseling. The GBLT community was very few letters in those days. And I thought to myself, from my experience, they're not that different. I mean, things might come up. And I'll always say that, at a certain point is this affected by something? And people say, no, I've lived a pretty good life. I don't experience any discrimination. But my partner drives me nuts. I said, okay, we're back to your partner driving you nuts. There's no special gay version of my partner driving me nuts. Let me just If there is, I don't know what it is until I ask. So part of what self-knowledge is, and part of what I'm against any kind of particular methodology, because I'll drop a name here, Hans Georg Gadamer in his book Truth and Method, um, as a philosopher of history and a deep existentialist, he said method never takes us to truth. And people thought, well, if I could just get a good method down, I'll get to the truth of history. And then that moves into what I'll call the existentialist mode is human existence is a mystery. Method won't take us to the answer. And there's something called the deep encounter with ourselves and the deep encounter with other people. So this knowledge, this insight, from my perspective, has to be rooted in certain skills that I will teach. But first of all, not constrained by a method, which is another one of my critiques of some traditional psychotherapy. I think I remember when I first had my first encounter with a therapist after my first marriage broke up when I was in, I guess, what, 28 or something. And the person was asking me about things and says, "What does this remind you of from your childhood?" And I thought, okay, I got a one-trick pony here. I don't know I'm not sure what to do here. I don't want to embarrass this person, but this is really not working for me. And I found my way to a better person and ultimately to a genius. But again, I could feel myself that the method was constraining the investigation, until I met a person who had, a kind of an unconstrained investigation. I worked for 17 years with a real master of the soul that, took me into dark, uncharted regions. And basically it was you know, um, marching around in the enchanted forest of my soul, and he was next to me and in front of me with a flashlight, and we came along for the ride. So that's a lot of what I think when I think about inner investigation. How do my thoughts, feelings, emotions run? What kinds of things does my consciousness attach itself to? I want to say one thing tonight, just because of a recent discussion with somebody. A person had an image of what he was supposed to be like, what his family was supposed to be like, and especially himself as, this is unconscious, a good person, as the problem solver. Um, a parent of a teenager, things were going rough, and the parent saw himself, as do many parents, I'm going to say, maybe mostly male, but maybe not, that the teenager is a problem. And as the parent, he has the solutions. And therefore, his job is to persuade the teenager that he has solutions and the child has to comply with his solutions. And things predictably only got worse. And therefore, he had an image of himself as the wise font of wisdom. And, therefore, part of what I need to do was to just shift two images. Number one, a person is not a problem to solve, but a mystery to encounter. That's how I named my email for this week. And secondly is this the method of reversal, which is, what if you're not wise? What if your child is wise? What if you didn't need to fix the family? What if the family's okay and you need to be fixed? Just reverse your premises. I'm not saying it's not true, but it does dislodge you from a way of thinking that prevents self-knowledge. If you think you are the font of wisdom in the family and everybody has to comply with you, you might want to get rid of that image, at least temporarily, and look at yourself and say, maybe my child has wisdom that I don't have. Maybe the family that I'm trying to fix can fix me if I would stop lording myself all other people. So this idea of stop with a theory, stop with a method, encounter yourself squarely. And therefore, the image of the father that the child is a problem to solve, he couldn't get to know his child. All he saw was a solvable problem. I think it was a math problem or something, as opposed to a mystery. So just this idea, which I think is, it is pretty valid. People are mysteries. We ourselves are mysteries to ourselves. And therefore, you have to look at yourself as a mystery without method, without a lot of premises, and encounter what you find there and work with what you find there. So I believe that's a good starting point. So the so-called true self, meaning the foundation of wisdom as knowledge into the self, inferred knowledge to others, process that people go through, some idea of the human condition, and it's always in flux. We're always learning something else. Um, Authenticity for me, now again, I'm not saying these are canonical definitions of the terms, but authenticity for me has meant how we present ourselves to other people. As much as possible is the mask down. We can't, of course, take off our persona, you know, to everybody. We always have to have some presentation of self. But my question is, once you have a sense of the true self, is it as close as possible, you know, within reason, to what you present to the world? And you know, I again known many people and looked at myself at times where there's a cultivation of affect as a way to manage one's representation of self to the world, to the point that we lose the connection between, I mean, we lose the difference between what's truly happening inside of us, you know, and what we present to the world. Now, again, there's no final authentic self. Um, it's just for me being aware when I go somewhere, is there a pretense? Am I putting on a persona? Am I trying to manage the situation? Or as much as possible is the self that is there as close as to what I'll call who I, you know, my who I really am, again, within caution and within reason. It's really interesting when you catch yourself at trying to manage the world with a persona, with a mask, with a cultivated presentation of self. Now, in spiritual psychology, this is oftentimes called the false self, or the lie. We get so invested in creating this persona that we lose touch, and we stop knowing the difference. So the meditation on the true self and the authentic self, I think, are lifelong meditations. They're never finished. We don't find the authentic self. We don't find the true self. It's part of what it means to become a whole human being, a thriving human being. So I wanted to clarify that a little bit. I also wanted to say again why I think that virtue is the first step. As I've talked to a few people, I think it's been misinterpreted. People think that because I focus on virtue so much, that is the main thing. It actually is only a minor starting point, which is stop doing things that destroy things. And the idea that when you look at yourself and you look at the forces within you that are either producing the behaviors, speech and behavior that's not making things better, the first thing is to simply stop. And you know, as I talk to people, and I recommend to, some of these are very smart, you know, credentialed people. And when I say you need to just stop talking that way, they always have a reason, which is I have to fix it. I have to make it better. I need to persuade this person, even if they've memorized. You know, one of the things in my wisdom works was never try to persuade a resistant person of anything. They say, yeah, I know, and I'm trying to persuade my wife never to try to persuade a resistant person of anything. I said, okay, I don't think you're fully getting what it means not to persuade people. You run into a resistant person, battering more is not going to make it better. You got to figure out, well, what's the resistance in there? Figuring out resistance is a way better use of your time than trying to persuade resistant people of anything. So I run into that over and over again. So I start with virtue, not because it's the end point, but I think it's an essential first point. The second thing I wanted to do tonight was refer to a couple of verses from Psalms 119 that I found really helpful in thinking about things. These verses that have been with me um, uh, probably most of my adult life. I began studying Psalms intensely in my 20s, you know, and I've been reading Psalms and underlining Psalms. Well, it's been a long time now, and so here's a couple. I'm just at the very beginning of Psalm 119. And again, I want to recommend this to you. When people say to me, how do you care for the soul? How do you cultivate the soul? My main answer is attention to a text, because language mediates the conscious to the unconscious mind. Certain kinds of language give expression to the soul, and I think actually heal the soul. I love all poetry, as you know, but I think as a religious community, we should have a common language. It's not our only language, but it's the common language. And the common language for me is the Bible, number one, the book of Psalms, in particular. And then, of course, there's many texts from the rabbinics, Talmud and Midrash and Kabbalah, but mainly the Bible, and mainly Psalms, Proverbs, etc. So here's a couple of lines I want to share with you. This is um, um, Psalm 119, verse 5. Psalm 119, verse 5. It says the following. I'll say it in English. My prayers, may my ways be firmly guided to keep your statutes. So in the Hebrew, achalai. This is my hope. This is my prayer. Yikonu drachav, drachai. Yikonu, likon means to establish something firmly. Yikonu drachai, my pathways, and here it means inner psychological habits. Lismor chukecha, to keep your hukim. Hukim doesn't mean laws without reason, but it means something very firm. For example, a chok that I teach is do not speak in anger, no criticizing, including unsolicited advice, complaining about people, harsh language, and extended conflict. So that's a chok for me. That's always bad all the time. You can't get rid of it. The urge is powerful. We all break bad, but as much as possible, don't do that, and things will get better. If a person says criticizing works, giving unsolicited advice to my teenage child is great for the kid. Probably not. You probably should see that as a chok, which means just don't do it. The urge is there, but it is a bal ya'avor, something that one ought not do. Now, so the question is, if that is true, there are certain things I just ought not do. This says, prepare my inner pathways to observe that. Means what do I need to do to follow the chukim, the basic laws of interpersonal conduct and inner conduct. So once you have a vision, once you have some sense of how to live optimally, the goal is transform because you have a chok, because there's a law. One way that people get off track, and I've been experiencing this for years and years, when I would present my chok, a few things would happen in class. One was skepticism, because people were taught, well, aren't we supposed to express ourselves? I said, no, that's actually not the goal in life. The goal of life is not self-expression, unless you're a poet or an author or a singer. The goal in life is human thriving, and part of human thriving is restraining negativity. So no, self-expression is not the goal of life. It's a goal properly conducted in the proper place. So there was some unteaching to do. Other people got it right away and said, if I would stop doing that, I would get better. I just maybe a 2 or 3 minute case. And other people would fight tenaciously. And that always interested me. Meaning I put out a chok, the spiritual psychological equivalent of don't murder, don't steal. Is that clear to me? People would say, well, what about when? And I, the stealing case. Well, what about to save your life? Can you steal food to save your life? I said, okay, pause. How often have you, in heaven of West Los Angeles, been that hungry where your only option was to steal? Well, not about me. I said, why ask it? I mean, I'm teaching chok, and you're finding all the exceptions because, of knowledge of the world, which is a way of avoiding what's happening in the class. So it's interesting for me. I'm trying to teach chok, which means here's what you do and don't do. Again, not because I'm saying, because I've discovered it. I discovered a chok. The less I engage in 4 C's, criticizing, complaining, condemning, etc., the better my life goes. It's a chok. Lo yavor. And what some people do is fight it. And same thing with counseling. Come to something clear. Many people have an ideal of themselves, that they manage life well, that they're smart people, that they're good people. I'm presenting to them that in tough moments, sometimes they're not so smart, not so wise, maybe even not so good. And some people say, wow, busted. You're right. I've been doing something really silly and destructive for a long time, and I would like to get over this. And other people say, well, but I have reasons. And I think to myself, wow, the resistance is tenacious. So when I look at a line like this, My hope is that my inner pathways will be established to follow your chok, Psalm 119, verse 5. That's a great meditation. Do you have, I'm asking all of us, do you have a chok? Do you have a law about how you should behave, about how you should think, how you should speak, how you should feel? Is there a chok, which means this is good and this is bad? And once I understand what is good and bad morally and better and worse spiritually, what do I do? So here's another kind of resistance. And again, it's archetypal resistance, the so-called natural emotion, mostly of anger. When people say that anger is natural, yes, it is. It's also natural to kill people. I mean, that's a natural urge. All you have to do is look at human history. That doesn't mean it's good. Natural is not good. So then the next question is, well, do I repress it? I said, no, you restrain it. Again, anger is also like a text to interpret. If I'm angry about something, if the world or another person is not complying with my desire, if I have some kind of need, expectation, um, or demand of the world, and when I'm thwarted, I get angry, this is the time not to get that need met through anger, but use the anger as a way to go deep inside of me of the nature of that need. And it's almost always to make another person or the world comply with a desire. So when I say no anger, what I mean is minimize anger as a way to manage the world. That's always going to go better. I'm not saying get rid of it. You can't get rid of it, but the minute you have it, use it as an entry moment to go within. So here's another thing I experienced as a counselor. A person will have expressed anger, and I said, well, let's use that as a portal to go within. And a person will say, well, I'm actually over my anger. I don't have any more anger. I said, well, you just shut the portal. I said, leave that open because it's a way to go within. And many people, they have an idealized image of themselves that of a not angry person. If they can't admit to it, they can't use it. So again, here, the verse that I've just read to you here, um, we're required to understand what our chok is, what our vision is, what our understanding of our optimal self is, and to squarely face when you are not in compliance with your chok, not as a way of a white knuckling it, but rather as a way of going inside and investigating what's happening in the inner life. So just a couple of more verses here. Again, I want to remind you, you have to have a vision, some sense of optimal living with no excuses, and then shape your inner life to meet the vision, but do it in a gentle way where you're not repressing yourself, you're not beating up on yourself, but rather working with the inner, I want to say machinery, but I like the poem that we read so much. I'll say like the organism within. You have to do it very carefully, very slowly. You have to nurture the plant, as it were, but the work has to be done. Um, uh, by the way, verse 6 is a nice follow-up. In 119, verse 6, it says, "As lo evosh," and then I will never experience a shame. Behabiti el kol mitzvotecha. My theory of shame that I speak about often in what I'll call the second level wisdom works classes. I remember when I was speaking about shame and people that said, what's all this focus on shame? Because it's in the Bible. Here it says, if I do this, I won't have shame. And shame, of course, meaning a deep sense that something is fundamentally wrong with you. Guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is there's something fundamentally wrong with me. It almost always comes from, it's going to sound odd, a kind of a narcissism, which means everybody's messed up, but I'm uniquely messed up. And I say to people, you're not that special. Actually, on the 1 to 10 of messed upness, you're like a 3. So don't think you're that messed up. Um, but this idea that there's something permanently bad about me, I met many people that it's very distressing. So now the question is, well, what's the mitzvah? What's the hope? What are you aiming toward? And let's say for some people, shame is just an accompanying feeling. Maybe there's a wound at youth. Maybe it's genetic. Some people have a more genetic disposition to shame. But if you're fulfilling the so-called spiritual and moral mitzvot, so what? So a person says, well, I'm having a shame experience again. And you metabolize and say, well, that's who I am. I easily feel insufficient. I easily feel like I'm not like other people. The fact of the matter is, I am fulfilling my spiritual and moral duties. So the shame actually is not an indicator of who I am. It's an indicator that I tend to feel bad about myself. And that's one of the first things I do when a person has shame. I say, well, let's do a reality check. I was speaking to a person recently uh, whose uh, whose spouse was trying to persuade them that they weren't a good person. And the person felt very bad about themselves. They were very susceptible to this kind of critique. And I said, well, what does everybody else think about you? And we went through a stock of like the 10 or 15 people that knew this person well. And I said, if I were to call them on the phone and say, I'll make up a name. What do you think about Ashley? And I said, what would they say? And people know you well. I'm talking about aside from your spouse, your parents, your sister, best friends, they would say, um, I mean, actually, she's, I was given access to a person. The person said to me, she's a person that I would trust my life with. She's good, she's thoughtful. And so I had one conversation and she gave me permission. And I said, people think you're this way. I said, what do you think of yourself? And she said, well, I think I'm kind of stupid. I think I'm slow. Um, I'm irresponsible. And I said, how'd you find all that out? Well, my husband. I said, okay. Wow, he really got to you. That's pretty terrible. And so she has a shame wound and he was able to activate it. And I said, okay, but you have the wound, you have an irresponsible husband, but then you have the truth. And sometimes the truth is just contemplate with a wider perspective and maybe even ask a few people. By the way, that could go two ways. I want to share with you an anecdote. I love sharing this anecdote because it is so informative. I hope you don't mind that I just like to tell war stories. But I was counseling a couple where the woman was very concerned that her husband was inappropriate around other people, that he said weird jokes and he made people uncomfortable and was a little, like on there's quirky to eccentric to weird. Well, he went over to the weird part of the spectrum. And she said, I'm trying to tell him. And I remember I said to her, well, what if he's not? What if it's you? And she said, well, what do I do? I said, well, look, you can really take a deep breath and do something extraordinarily risky and ask a few people. And she ran it by her husband. He says, absolutely. You ask any of your friends what they think about me, please do. So we scripted a big wind up. And she went to her friend and says, I want you to tell me what you honestly think about my husband when we go out to dinner. To tell you the truth, I feel awkward and uncomfortable, and he thinks he's fine. And I want you to tell me the truth. Please, this is my marriage depends on, please tell me the truth. This is what I tell you the truth. He's great. You're really controlling, and you really are ego identified with your husband. And like, you make us all uncomfortable. How much you want to control him. Well, she went to two or three friends and she just came so shamefaced. She says, Rabbi, my entire marriage, I've been feeling awkward and ashamed about him. It has nothing to do with him. Now, I'm not assuming that her husband went and paid off all her friends. I'm not assuming that. I don't think it happened. Uh, but the sense I got was, there's something called ego identification with the spouse or the child, that my sense of self depends on how they behave. And in a way, I'm living out my shame wound through them. And that's something that requires incredible self-knowledge to detect that. And again, knowledge of other people and so forth, and reducing the need that other people comply with our image of what people are supposed to be like. So again, what I'm trying to share with you is how my reading of a psalm, I stop, meditate, think, ingest, and it takes me on a path to introspection and soul knowledge. I just want to do two more. I like this one, 119 verse 9. 119 verse 9. It says, uh, Bame yizaken et orcho lishmor dvarecha. How can a young person, the Hebrew word is yizkeh lizakot, means to, zach means pure. How can a young person purify their path? Nothing surprising here, but that the author was looking at that the youth of his day, his or her day, and looking and seeing how they were off the rails, and more or less saying that, as I have said to young people, depending on their problem, there's a teaching, there's a path. I just want to give you one example from a recent session with a truly wonderful young woman that I've been in touch with the family for many years for one reason or another, and one is counseling both the people independently as a family, but I say reach out to me whenever. So it's every 2 or 4 months. Now she's in college. It began when she was 14. Now she's a sophomore in college, and she has a really, not the first time, a really terrible roommate. And because this young woman is is inherently wise and has some good skills, she's found that she's become the psychologist of the floor in her dorm. So people are lining up to get her advice. I've created a monster. How do how do I get my life back? And and it was, we had to get some very, very specific skills on how to draw boundaries with needy people. She says, Rabbi Feeling, that's horrible. I don't like to label people. And I said, well, they're going to draw you under. You have to protect your time and protect your energy and figure out, kind of a triage, whom you can help, who you can't, whom prefer, a little bit like the life of a psychologist or a clergy person. You have to figure what you can do well, and don't string yourself out. And then with this young person, again, over years of counseling, getting ready to completely downgrade a relationship, troubled since high school, and a real sense of loss because we've been talking about how to draw boundaries, and a friend that just doesn't respect boundaries, and partly because this friend doesn't respect her. And a real deep investigation. Um, do I present myself as someone who can be disrespected? Do I try too hard for this person's approval or approval in general? Do I try to appease people? I think I'm a good person in looking for trying to accommodate, appease, make peace, but other people see it as weakness. I said, they might not actually see it as weakness, but it's some kind of primal level. Predators detect prey, and you're more of a gazelle, and your friend is more of a. I wanted to say hyena, but I think I just said tiger. I said, I said, so even a gazelle can learn how to fight, and sometimes you got to, set those other animals back. And she realized that her friend wasn't really consciously saying you're weak, so I will push you around, but rather because of her behavior, she was giving a signal to a certain kind of a personality that I can control you. Then her self-respect would back up, and she tried to set boundaries, and there would be conflict. And so I just worked with her, just one really deep meditation on the way her inner life operated, understanding her drachim and hergalim, her pathways, and and then what triggered her in the outside world. By the way, one thing I didn't do is talk about her parents. I mean, I don't. This wasn't a time to figure out why you are as you are, but how are you? Meaning, looking at the what you call the true self, what your operating system is, exactly what you're like, and now the authentic self. I said, does your lack of firm boundary setting, trying to accommodate, trying to appease, trying to make peace, is that authentic? Or does that come from a truth of you as a human being? And she said, actually, really, I want more respect than I want to get along with people. She said, it's taken me a long time to get there. I actually want respect. And the idea of getting along with people, I don't want that anymore. And she said, but I don't know how to authentically demand respect. And we talked about it, and I gave some ideas. But here's an example where, again, looking at here, how is a young person purified? Follow the law. And so, one of the law is drawing uh, kind, clear, firm, resolute boundaries, and then looking at your own inhibitions and then working on those inhibitions um, to actually fulfill what you know is the proper way to live. And one of them is not trying to persuade someone to respect you, but rather your comportment that actually simply commands respect. So one more line from Proverbs 119, which again, for me is a continuously rich text in prompting me to certain kinds of inner life introspection. So go to 119:18. 119:18. It says, Gal enai ve'abita niflaot mitoratecha. Gal enai ve'abita niflaot mitoratecha. So gal enai is a sense of take the covering over my eyes. So let my eyelids roll up. Ve'abit, gal enai ve'abita niflaot mitoratecha. The wonders of your Torah. Here it does not mean the 5 books of Moses, but something like the teaching as the mysterious moral and spiritual ordering of the universe. I said to a person once who said to me, "I need to learn. I need learn to be more stoic, meaning more resilient and less reactive." And it's again a person I've been counseling off and on for many, many years. And I said, "Let me upgrade a little bit your knowledge of Stoicism." I said, "You think Stoicism is resilience, right?" He says, "Yeah, that's the Daily Stoic and the Stoic podcast." I said, "It's actually not. The foundation of Stoicism, which by the way simply means the teaching from the porch. Stoa is the porch, and Stoicism is the philosophy that the porch teachers came up with." I said, if a person thinks they understand Stoicism, but they haven't studied the Logos, they don't know Stoicism. And he said, "Wow, I think I heard of that." He said, "Because this, but tell me more." I said, "Stoicism is the following. Once you understand the 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 mystical ordering of the universe, the spiritual and moral ordering of the universe, and you're able to bring it down into yourself, that's when you're resilient. When you know the right way to think, speak, behave is, don't back down." But many people, if they don't know the Logos, they're just stubborn, which means they will continue to do something. They think resilience is doing something that actually is not in accord with what the Stoics would call the natural law. The natural law, by the way, is a very Stoic idea. I said the beginning of Stoicism might be resilience. And again, I'm a bit conflicted about that word. I think I shared with you, I went to a conference on teenagers, and one of the problems with teenagers who are not compliant in getting their homework done, and they wanted children to be more resilient in getting their homework done. And I said, maybe not. Maybe parents need to be less resilient about bossing their kids around. Maybe kid is looking for meaning and not, an A. Maybe they'll take a B if they have more time to read poetry. I said, I don't know. But if a kid is pushing back, don't say my kid lacks resilience. Maybe the parent lacks wisdom. Now, so I'm trying to imagine a parent that says, well, my kid is not resilient. They don't do their homework, as opposed to a parent who knows, you might call the Logos of parenting. What is the, as it were, for me, the ideal nature of parenting? I have a list of 20 terms, but one of them is teach your child to be safe / manage risk well from a young age. Children are going to take risks, especially boys, and there has to be a constant conversation of risk management. Okay? Now, very few parents, they tell kids what to do, but they don't see it as a constant training that the mind is always a cost benefit analysis, and some boys really want to take risk, but they've never really been taught about risk management and how to draw boundaries with other boys who want them to take unreasonable risk. I said that's a skill that has to be taught. So safe managing risk well, number one. Number two, moral. Don't cause pain to other people, including emotional pain. Insightful. So I give my list of my first 10 things. I'll have you talk about anytime anybody asks me. And I said, from my perspective, homework is way down on the list because the school will teach them all that stuff, and yeah, they should get good grades and participate in class. And so I'm in favor of all that. I was a good student. I enjoy being a good student. But when I look back at my childhood, what I realized is the one thing that a parent can do that the school can't do is give wisdom. And I remember as myself, I had to figure a lot of this out myself. Because I think my parents, like many people, bought with the rest. Well, how are your grades? What's your homework? Are you doing well in school? Yeah, good job. We're done. As opposed to, when I look back at myself, a considerable amount of unnecessary suffering because I lacked wisdom. Again, so when I went to the seminar, it was give the kids resilience to do their homework. As we be more stoic. I thought about the logos. Give the parents the capacity to grasp the logos of parenting, and then they're restrained in trying to manage their kids toward these external goals that really are not guarantors of lifelong well-being. Just to put it briefly, if you had to choose between, uh, you know, um, how many more sentences of the new vocabulary words, again, I'm always in favor of a big vocabulary, versus extended insight. Insight is the greatest gift you can give a child. So sometimes I speak to the parent of the non-compliant child and I say, instead of telling them to get their homework done, cultivate the insight of where the resistance is and reward them for insight, not for getting the homework done. So the homework should get done eventually. I agree, but don't skip insight in the process. So when it says here, open my eyes that I may grasp the wonders of your Torah. It's by the way, the word logos in Greek, translation of which is Torah. A logos, a teaching. Logotherapy in Hebrew would be, the therapy of Torah. It's the same word. So, and as I guided this person who's getting ready to move beyond, virtue as restraint to wisdom as grasping the inner reality of the human condition, which is what I will call the Stoic idea of the logos, which means what are the spiritual and moral laws of the universe? How are they operating within me? And it's a pretty wondrous journey. And again, a lot of that journey for me is taken through the Bible, not just the Psalms part, but of course the narratives of the Bible as well. One last verse from here. This is, I have to say, one of my favorite lines in the Bible. Psalm 119:19. That's easy to remember, right? Psalm 119:19. Ger anochi ba'aretz, al tastir mimeni mitzvotecha. Ger anochi ba'aretz. I'm a stranger in the world, or I'm a stranger. This is like when Moses said, Ger anochi ba'eretz nochriya. I'm a stranger in a strange land. Ger anochi ba'aretz. Sometimes I think for the more spiritually blessed or afflicted among us, one common feeling we have is the strangeness of human life. Things just feel strange. We're not prepared for heartbreak. We're not prepared for loss. We're sometimes not even prepared for love. We often don't understand why people do what they do. We are a mystery to ourselves. And I think that the strangeness is something that accompanies us. But I looked when it says Ger anochi ba'aretz, I'm a stranger on the land, is actually cultivating a sense of strangeness, which means instead of seeing it as something that happens to us, say to yourself, I am a stranger in a strange land. I don't understand this place. I don't understand my place in this place. I don't have a map to this place. Actually, to use strangeness as in a way, a cultivated feeling of being one step out of the world as a way to see the world. In a way, only a stranger, only it takes a stranger to see things as they are. I feel that in oftentimes where I will point things out to people and will say, "Wow, you're really right. That's what's happening here." Because I'm a step removed, and I much more want to understand things than than to fix anything. And so I find that our role as a stranger in a strange land actually gives us an important perspective. So it says, Ger anochi ba'aretz, I'm a stranger in this land in Psalm 119:19, and it goes on to say, um, Al taster mimeni mitzvotecha. Do not hide your mitzvot from me. So here I don't think of the religious mitzvot, but I think of a mitzvah. I borrowing a phrase from a friend, from a colleague whose name I've forgotten, mitzvah as a sacred urging from the divine. So don't confuse a mitzvah with the so-called 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, but rather think of a mitzvah as some kind of sacred urging from the divine. And I'll go very deep on this and say it's a sacred urging to live a life of truth, a life of authenticity, an urging to live in accordance with the spiritual and moral law, but it's hidden within us. There's so much noise. There are so many levels of our own deception. There are so many wrong paths we can take that you might say that authentic sacred urging from the divine is simply hidden. So the person is saying this, I'm a stranger here. I know there's a way to get through this, but I can't find it. Okay. I'm a stranger here. I don't know exactly what to do to make this better, to make myself feel better, to think better, to achieve my goals, purpose, meaning in life. It's all strange to me. And then it says, don't hide your commandments from me. Now, I don't feel the idea that it's the divine that's hiding it. I think it's more of a natural part of the human condition, that the authentic, true thing to do is beyond my reach. I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. This Psalm 119:19. I remember when I first read it, studied it. Again, I'm probably um uh I want to say 35, 40 years ago now. Um there's a book by Robert Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land, a song by Leon Russell. So it was a familiar phrase to me. And I remember saying, well, it's in the Bible. But, that title, that song has roots. And that certainly named how I felt. I felt very much I'm a stranger in a strange land. I don't understand what this is. But then to realize, but there is something to do. There are, as it were, hidden mitzvot. They're hidden, and therefore a good part of my life, through deep reflection and contemplation, is trying to bring that out. So I realized one thing I wanted to do tonight was take a lot of my organized wisdom work teaching, and it is highly organized and getting more organized. A lot of it is rooted in, you might say, a rather haphazard discovering of truth because I read the Bible in order, which means I don't have a theory of Psalm 119. I just read Psalm 119. And then one verse produces, a little bit of wisdom. Another verse produces another bit of wisdom. When I do the wisdom works, I have to organize it. But I wanted to share with you that a lot of the insights that I have come simply from reading one verse after another, reading it carefully, deeply, memorizing it at least for a moment, breathing it in, letting the words sink inside of me. Like the image of the plant, the verse goes underground. It connects with other verses that I've studied on another day. My soul uses it, you might say, to weave its interior wisdom and knowledge. And then I open my eyes and I feel I've locked in a piece of wisdom. Then I go to the next verse. It's not an organized way to study wisdom. It's an organic way to study the great wisdom of Psalm 119, which I think stands out in its richness, the continuous richness, but also my entire study. So I want to encourage you again to participate in our common language, our common language of the soul, which for me is the Bible, especially Psalms and Proverbs in particular. Again, not to exclude the wonderful narratival proportions, which I love. Um, but whatever narrative I study, ultimately it's going to come down to an axiom, some kind of epigram that I can lodge into my soul. So the takeaway for all of us here is that we are strangers in a strange land. We're living in a mystery. We are mysteries. Other people are mysteries to encounter, not problems to solve. We should be amazed by the beauty of the teaching and the soul of other human beings, and with this grasp of the beauty, come to the truth, and let's all help each other navigate this this strange and wonderful territory that we call life.